Today, I am going to be talking about money, finance, investing, and wealth. I would hope that this session will be the first of a few more, or the first of many, on the topic. Let me begin by making it clear as to my objectives, my aims, but most importantly, my target audience. My target audience with regards to this particular topic, or the series of topics that will ensue, are people who perhaps have an understanding of finance, have an understanding of wealth, money management, but perhaps are confused about all of the various strategies, tactics, approaches, philosophies, all the different words that they've heard over time, messages they've been given, recommendations sent to them, and are confused about how the whole system of finance works, or how the whole system of investing works. Let me reassure you, if you happen to be in that category, or if you have since left that category, that you are not alone, and the uncertainty, sometimes the trepidation, the confusion that you might feel is not exclusive to you as a person. Prior to a decade ago, the social media and the internet, as a method for sharing ideas and collaborating, was relatively in its infancy stage. The way people learn, the way I learned, was to pick up a book. You picked up a book because you either went to the library or you purchased the book yourself. It takes a lot for one person to decide to go to a shop, buy a book, first of all research the book you want, buy the book, sit down and read it, and finish the book. And once completed, analyze the ideas in the book to see whether some of the ideas are consistent with how you would do things, identify the hidden gems, recognize where it doesn't apply to you, and then take the first step towards implementing the ideas. It takes a while. So for most people, over the last decade, what we've seen has been a decentralization of information, but also a distribution of information in smaller sizes. Podcasts, videos like this, audio, video, even teachings in person. And so what you've had over the last decade is so much information. It's become information overload. When I started learning about investing and finance, there were very few respected books on the subject. The reason primarily being that the number of great investors were few, and those who were the great investors were too busy managing their funds, and therefore did not have time to sit down and explain their ideas, their principles, their strategies, their philosophies. So it was quite hard. You had to either go to annual meetings, or you had to perhaps subscribe to a particular, let's say, investors fund. And that way you heard the intelligent people talk about why they made certain decisions, the mistakes they made, the successes they've had, and you could ask questions. Not always, but sometimes. The Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting was called the Woodstock for capitalists, because it was an opportunity for every person from every walk of life, if you were a stockholder, to come and ask questions. You had two very, very wise people, Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, the chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, Charlie being the vice chairman. And so it was a way of obtaining some knowledge from people who dedicated their lives to learning. Now today, everyone who has a video camera and everyone who has an interest in the topic can share ideas. Now that means that for most people, it can get quite confusing. It's hard to understand what to do. This brings me to where I begin today's session. There are certain tasks that should be delegated, that should be outsourced. Such tasks will range in interests. For example, if you have problems with your tooth and you want to see a dentist, it would make sense for you to outsource that to someone who was trained in that profession. If you needed an accountant and you were not trained as an accountant, you would outsource that to someone who was trained as an accountant. If you needed a doctor, and let's say this is a heart surgeon, you would hopefully, I hope, outsource the task to someone who is a trained physician. Investing, on the other hand, seems to be the one place where all of the professions that I have described and people who are professionals in such fields and who are competent think and believe that because they are competent in one area, then that makes it okay for them to be responsible for their investments. With the exceptions of pensions, which most people are, I guess, don't have a choice but to invest through an intermediary, most people, especially over the last decade, have come to a position where they've said, I think I can do a good job as someone who is trained to do the job for me. Now, I take no sides and I have no criticism for such a position. People in that category who work a full-time job but also want to be fully invested or managing their investment portfolio have a dilemma. You have to do two things at once. Be competent in your job to keep the revenue and the income coming through, but also take whatever you are able to put aside for investments and allocate that very carefully, intelligently for the long term, and get both right. The confusion then sets in. You have to go somewhere to learn, and you have to learn from someone. If there are so many competing thoughts and ideas, that makes it really, really complicated and confusing for a lot of people. So, what I hope to do in the series that follow, or in the conversations that follow, will be to go back to the basics and share what I have been able to learn about investing, finance, wealth, money. Not with the idea of giving you an approach to follow, but to share a journey that I've had to go through myself, a journey of learning, a journey of unlearning, and then a journey of relearning where necessary, so that you can delineate and see where your approach perhaps needs to concentrate on. You can also see through the art of comparison where your approach is superior to mine, or perhaps where you need improvement. Now let me start by saying this. Over the last 100 years, we have had the opportunity to observe a number of really, really great investors. Irrespective of asset classes, and And I'll give you a few names. We start with someone considered the godfather or the founding father of value investing, a term he never used, but a term associated with him nonetheless. Benjamin Graham, the teacher of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. We move on from there and we come into the Warren Buffetts and the Charlie Mungers, the Seth Klarmans of that period. We come forward into the likes of the Bill Ackmans, not recognizing, or rather notwithstanding, we also recognize people like George Soros and his associates, Stan Druckenmiller or Stanley Druckenmiller, for example, people who achieved so much in their profession, incredible results. We come forward to people such as Howard Marks and a few other names. Now, I've been describing people in the securities industry, debts and equity securities, people who traded in the stock market or the bond market, or people who invested in the stock market and bond market. But we also have properties and real estate. And we have people like Sam Zell, who was considered perhaps the pioneer of what we call the REIT market, the Real Estate Investment Trust. We have people such as, the name escapes me now, Barry Steinhertz, something like that. The guy who was responsible for a number of hotel brands and who invested across all asset classes within real estate, responsible for what we know as the W Hotel, the One Group or the One Hotel, Starwood. He was the one responsible for Starwood Hotels and Starwood as a brand. Really transformed the real estate industry. Barry Steinhertz or Steinglet. Forgive me, I'm getting the last name wrong. But if you search for Starwood Capital or Starwood, a face comes up, and for those who have been in the industry for a long time, these were people who were good teachers and intelligent investors. The Sam Zells, the people who also shared. We even include people such as, and although it's politically incorrect to say that, people like Donald Trump, who was very huge in property investing and real estate, but also very inspiring. All of those people had huge amounts of success. And each and every one of them had a different approach to how they invested. There were similarities, but there were subtle uniquenesses to how they invested. Now this brings me to the first point of the whole concept of investing. You look across the last 100 years and you find people who have achieved incredible results over a long period of time, applying different strategies to invest in. Now you have to forgive me because I haven't included the likes of someone considered for our time and our generation, and perhaps in the last 3 or 4 generations, to be one of the greatest, Ray Dalio, the greatest and the largest hedge fund manager in the world, even at present. I should have included that. The point of the matter is, if you looked across all of these names, what you find is people with different styles to invest in, different philosophies to invest in, different strategies to invest in, different time horizons to invest in. Soros and Stan Druckenmiller and even Ray Dalio will fall within what we call macro investors. The likes of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, Bill Ackman, and Howard Marks will fall within what we call Micro investing, people who invest based on companies, what the companies are able to produce. So they begin from the bottom and they assess the business and its viability, its value from the bottom up. Those who focus on macro start from the top and they come down, they think about the economy, they think about interest rates, they think about geopolitics, and they try to see how that trickles down into companies in countries. Across those names that I've provided, there are people there who invest in equities and debts, securities. There are those who invest in just properties, and there are those who invest in just infrastructure. I have to say this also, there are those who simply trade. Across those names we have two groups, if you choose, investors and speculators or traders. Now recognize that the second classification is not inferior to the first classification. Speculators or traders are those who, generally speaking, look at the market, identify deviations in the market, identify noise and signals, and profit from what they consider to be inconsistencies in the market, and able to make money by betting against or betting using a contrary approach to what the market perceives. They simply want to use what we call incremental information, psychology of the market, demand supply, geopolitics, macro events to predict, and they support that prediction with their capital. There are other people who say, I'm here for the long term. I will simply make the best decisions I can over the long term, and I have a 20, 30, 5, 7 year horizon. And in that 7, 10, 20, 30 horizon, I intend to make my money back and some. They do the analysis, and therefore they are able to make a decision whilst ignoring the fluctuations in psychology, macro events, interest rates, inflation, ignoring the short term because they're playing the long game. Now, on both camps and in both categories, there's been a lot of success. Now, this brings me to the first point, which is, I hope you can see that there is no philosophy in investing that works for everyone. Warren Buffett has a philosophy that has worked for him. It started from his teacher, Benjamin Graham. It was influenced by his mentor and colleague, Charlie Munger. It was refined over time as he understood and learned about new things in the market. Stan Druckenmiller has a different philosophy that works for him. It worked a lot better in the 70s and the 80s than it does today, primarily because of artificial intelligence. As a result of information being available to everyone, Ray Dalio plays a different game. The point is that every single great investor seems to have a philosophy that has been tailored to their personality, to their age, to their appetite for risk, to their time horizon, and more importantly, they choose a philosophy that allows them to sleep at night. Now, for you and I, there's something we can learn from that concept. The first thing we can learn is that there is no such thing as the best investment philosophy, or the best strategy, or the best approach to investing, or even the best asset class. The one constant in your life and in your decisions is you. So what you have to do is begin with an open mind to study the various philosophies that have thrived over time. The philosophies of investing and the philosophies of speculating, and what connects both. The bridge between investing and speculation, and recognizing why they are different and where that they are different. Once you've done that, you insert yourself into that mix. You have to understand yourself, your temperament, what makes you thick, what makes you think. Your fears, you have to understand your age, your time horizon, your appetite for risk. For some of us, whether you're predisposed to an income that can provide you with security, and therefore that allows you to take a broader perspective and a long-term perspective on your decisions. On the other hand, if you're a father or you are a mother and you have dependents and kids, your decision-making process changes slightly because you're not just an individual. You have to think about the family. What could happen if you lose the funds? What could happen if you have need for the funds at the wrong time in the market? So for example, you buy a stock, it goes down by 15%. At the point where it reaches 15% down under, you learn that you need that money for perhaps your child's first tuition fees. What would you do? How much savings do you have? By inserting yourself into all of these philosophies and having studied all the philosophies, the major ones, what you are able to do is come like as you arise from the waters. What you're able to do is then tailor the philosophies you've studied with your temperament, with your personality, with your appetite for risk, to what you think is your philosophy. Now here is the key part. When you start your journey, like I did, you will lean towards one particular influence or philosophy. In my case, I lean towards Benjamin Graham, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger. That lineage is more consistent with my approach. I'm technical in my analysis. I'm more logical. I'm not very good with telling stories. I'm not very good with speculating or projecting. I don't know how to read the mood and the momentum of the environment. So I prefer the bottom-up analysis approach rather than the top-down. That is just my temperament. I have seen shortcomings in choosing that approach to investing, particularly over the last 6-7 years. Now, let me say something that I think is important. As you emerge into your philosophy, recognize that you need to give yourself some grace, because you will make mistakes. But you want to fail fast and fail early, and fail with small amounts. The business of investing cannot be done casually. The reason being that when we succeed, we tend to party and celebrate. When we fail, we tend to ponder and introspect and pause. The pain that comes from failure, combined with introspection and reflection, if the lesson hidden in the failure is extracted from the experience, and if that lesson is applied intelligently in the future, what you have is progress. You have improvement. So allow yourself some grace. You will have faith, a word that most people do not associate with investing. But everything we do in investing is about faith. We have all of the knowledge of the past, but we do not make decisions based on the past. All of our decisions will be based on the future. We make investment decisions based on a future that is uncertain, sometimes using knowledge of the past and the present, but nonetheless making a decision based on a future that is unknown, cannot be predicted, though we can speculate on the probable events that might take place. The closer we are to the present, the more likely we'll be extrapolating into the immediate present. The more we go into the future, the more we are simply speculating. But at the core is the word faith. We put our hope, dreams, belief into action. So faith without works is dead. By taking action, you've expressed the highest level of faith. And your faith will be tempted, tested, and sometimes brought to a position of uncertainty. Give yourself some grace. The starting point is study. Understand why the philosophies are what they are. Understand the investors, their journeys, their experiences, and why they chose such philosophies. Combine both and recognize, or combine all of them and recognize where there are differences, where they actually are similarities. Now, the key thing across the two separate groups, investing and trading, is that you will find that there are more similarities than there are differences. The differences are at the margins in the two camps. So studying all approaches will not be too difficult. It might require a few books. Get off the internet, sit down, pick up a book and study. You will find, as I did, that when you begin the journey of study, there will be words that come across as foreign to you. There is a correlation between your vocabulary in investing, finance, money management and wealth, and the probability that you will not make mistakes. In other words, as your vocabulary of words increases, the tendency that you will make poor decisions, providing you understand those words, tends to decrease. Put it in more simple terms. There's a saying, if you are playing poker and you haven't spotted the fish, then it must be you. You have to be aware. Ever been to a country where people speak a foreign language and you can't understand the language? Sometimes you do feel quite silly. Listening to people talk across and not knowing what they're saying, it makes you vulnerable. But if you understand the language and you don't speak back but you keep quiet, now you can understand what's being said. You can aim to protect yourself in case there are rude players in the environment, and there always are. So allow yourself some grace, study. When you've studied, get off the couch, put some money into what you've studied by practice. That allows you to fail if you succeed. Don't party. There is no lesson to be learned from success. You learn from failure. The best thing you can do is to find people who have different perspectives to you, who are contrary to you in thinking, who take a different position to you, but who are competent. Bring them to the table, have disagreements, respectfully, thoughtfully, present your views, allow them to present their views. In many ways, see if you can get yourself to argue their position so that you can actually embrace what they are saying. The purpose of which is to allow the truth, or what will be a hierarchy of possible truths, to emerge. You're not always right. There are times when you're wrong. There have been times when, and so many times when I have been wrong. Having people around to debate and discuss matters, which is what the internet provides and social media, allows you to minimize the risk of failure. So that before you make a decision, you can send a tweet, you can instant message, you can send a private message, you can share publicly a question, and people will run to engage and interact with you. People have done analysis of businesses, studied companies. Sometimes they live in locations where the business you're analyzing is based. It's so easy to get information these days. So one of the mistakes I made early days was, and remember, at the time, the whole social media and the internet connectivity is fairly new. In my early days, there was no connection. The only people you could communicate with were people who were in the same proximity as you were, or people who were part of the same clique. For example, the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders group. You exchanged numbers, you would send emails to people, and you can bounce off ideas. One of the key things about that meeting was And the interaction was people could exchange contact. So you knew people. It was part of a big club. And so you could engage with people and have other people push back or encourage, challenge, critique your position. By doing that, what you've done and what you create is what I call a board of directors around your decision-making process. People who can say, I have no skin in the game and you're not paying me, so I can tell you what I think. I think your analysis is potentially flawed. And you can sit back and say why. And they can present to you why you could be wrong. Now recognize they're doing you favors. They're saving you the possibility of harm. Welcome that. Now when you've gone through that process, it's time to take action. Start small, and then take the feedback, make the corrections where necessary. Now I hope that's been useful. I hope that's been an introduction to what I hope will be many more conversations. It certainly has been interesting for me, thinking through the ideas and trying to recall some of what I've shared so far, and recognizing that my memory has been in need of some practice, not remembering names, conflating certain time periods. In any case, it's been fun.